of studio dust in my throat. But it was a great scene. It was a wonderfully written scene.
Was it fun?
Yes.
Yeah.
Originally, George had said it in the office, in Palpatine's office. And he said, I think we've seen enough of the office. We need to go somewhere else. And then he said, what about, come on Ian, you're a man of the theatre. Well, let's go to the theatre. Let's say they're watching an opera or a ballet. Sort of prawn ballet. And of course we were staring at absolutely nothing. We were staring at the black which covered the village, the studio village. And there were two cameras of us. One was there, at your level, sir, and another one there. And that was all we saw. But what was great about the scene, it meant that we could both act with each other and away, while pretending to look at a show. And that was a real gift to the scene.
Yeah, it's beautiful in that, just the subtleness of that. And then also, having the theater, work in the theater, is it fun to be able to play and not worry too much about the sound there, where you're able to just really let those moments...
Yes, yeah.
And your work in the theater is really marvelous. Do you miss it when you're away from it if you're doing a film, or do you pull all of that into what you're doing?
Yeah, it's always hard to say. Of course, everyone knows this now. I think that film acting isn't the same as acting in the theatre. And if I didn't have this thing on now, I would be doing my very best to make all of you up there hear me as distinctly as the microphone. And that would be by giving it a certain kind of energy. But it had to be the kind of energy that wouldn't look ridiculous to all of you sitting down there. So it's a sort of special talent, but it's one I think we're in danger of losing, because every now and again, if we have to do plays in larger theatres, people say, well, you can get a device like this to enhance your voice so you don't need to strain so hard. But the thing about movie acting is, that scene is quite a good example of it, and Hayden is terrific at doing it in that scene. The camera comes to you and captures what you're thinking and what you're feeling. So you'll better be thinking and feeling something interesting. Because if you're not, it'll capture the nothingness too. It'll just sort of deliver a blank. But you have to allow that to happen. You have to allow the camera to take over. And also you've got to allow your performance to disappear into a box, or however they carry your performance these days, into the editing suite, where the director and the editor then take it and fashion it into something that's called a film performance. That's the way it works. I think that's great. I think it's fascinating. But in the theatre, of course, you still have the power of creating moment to moment with everybody who's come that evening. So anything can happen. And in the movies, of course, it's all prescribed.
Yeah. And so, with all of this work on the green screen and blue screens doing the Star Wars films, your theater work, I would have to imagine, really helped, because quite often in the theater you're having to imagine. You don't have the sets.
Yes, and we all have to imagine all the time. It's not a great problem. It wasn't a problem for me in the Star Wars movies. But then the thing about Palpatine was he was always playing a double game. So he always had a subtext going on in his mind. Whether or not George chose to show how much was actually going on when he was saying something and meaning another, was, up to him. But I didn't have to suddenly confront large armies and hordes without quite knowing where they were coming from or what force they had. And I used to feel very sympathetic towards you in particular, who had that. Because often George wasn't able to tell him because he didn't know yet. You wouldn't know until he strung a picture together whether this army that was coming towards us, or these aliens, were somehow able to be shrugged off ironically, or whether they were a matter of life and death. And an actor really sort of needs to know that. But there was no sort of willful withholding of information. He just didn't know. So the guys really had to provide George with a series of choices. And when you're thinking about your character, you feel very strong views about what he or she is thinking or doing at that particular moment in time. And the Star Wars movies, in a sense, now and again, and it happened with other movies too, you had to, as it were, offer a variety, even if sometimes you thought, well, that's not really where my character is at this moment. The problem was, now and again, nobody knew, including George, where the character was at that moment.
Yeah, and so now, were you ever thinking as Sidious as you're portraying Palpatine? I mean, because That scene in particular, too, you kind of see that.
Yes. I always, again, the script is the script, and we never talk about backstory although obviously the whole Star Wars is a backstory, it's Vader's backstory. But when you get a scene where you're actually allowed to talk, as you've just seen there, sort of illustrated example, then you can bring lots of other things into play, and you can, of course he's out there to draw the boy into the dark side, but you also sense little things about the backstory of Palpatine himself. It'd be nice to think one day they might be followed up, who knows?
It would be. It would be. Yes. There is, of course, I'm fortunate enough to play Obi-Wan in the Clone Wars and all, but there is a fanboy in me, and of course, as a voice actor, I just have to let you know, when we do our sessions in voiceover, not just the Star Wars stuff, there is so often, I was doing a session for another cartoon the other day, and everybody is always quoting your lines as the Emperor. Do you have any, are you aware of that is such a, I mean, especially from Jedi, these just great one-liners kind of in all that you have?
Yes, yes. In Jedi, Return of Jedi, that was Lawrence Kasdan's script, and it was very spare, as they all are. Once, actually, when I was watching a recording session of John Williams conducting the London Symphony Orchestra in the studio to lay down the soundtrack, you don't hear the actors' voices downstairs playing instruments, and then they come in and they check and they go back. And I said at one point, God, George, this is just like a silent movie. And he said, it is a silent movie. Of course, he didn't mean that, but he meant in a sense that it had that kind of simplicity and energy, and that the words, while fine, were not paramount. Now, lots of people make jokes about the words in Star Wars, but the ones I got were pretty good. And while there wasn't much to say, then I would sort of focus on a word, and in the early days of Return of the Jedi, the word friend fascinated me, because I thought, well, he doesn't have any. so he obviously thinks people who do, are wet and stupid. The idea that they should want to get on with other people, and not lead a totally selfish, self-obsessed existence was absurd. So I had a great time with the word friend.
Just like him when you do that. It's amazing.
But actually, when I was waiting in the wings, and when I heard "soup of the day," I thought, how did he do that?
We actually, because it was just so fun to look at some of those, and we have a clip here. Let's just take a look at some of that from Jedi.
From here, you will witness the